The next speaker will help to give a bit more context why you might have seen all the moose or mees flying around in the conference for the past couple of days. He is an excellent engineer living in the United States of America. He's using NeoVim on Windows. He doesn't use LSP though. He is also building his custom iOS build pipelines because he doesn't like Xcode. And with my utmost pleasure, I would like to introduce the next speaker, unfortunately remote, Ted Bendixson.
All right, why do I keep seeing this? So every time I go on to one of these online software development communities, I'm in a lot of them, and some of them, for low-level programming, some of them for game development. When I go to the showcase section for most of these communities, I see something like this. So it's usually somebody, they have their like renderer stress test demo, or they're showing off something like, look at how many cubes I can do. Look at how much, the light's reflecting off of it. Look at all these rotating cubes, etc. It's nice. It's some kind of rendering demo. Or it'll be something like, I'm flying through like all this like Minecraft. Look at how many textures I can do. It seems like to me, there's way more videos of that than there are videos of, like games, actual software products that we want to make. So I would pose to you, considering that we're doing the Better Software Conference here, and the goal is to make better software that people will actually use, why is it that we see so many of this kind of thing and not so much games? And it turns out that if you go onto Steam, most of what you're seeing in the top 100 list, the things that are, actually making money, it's not like millions of rotating cubes. It turns out that it's actually games, and a lot of the games are pretty much selling, so far as I can tell, based on their design. So they do have really good graphics. Yes, that's very important. That is a really important part of the picture. But if I'm looking, I just took a cross section here. So if I'm looking at, what's selling on Steam, we've got Balatro here, which I really wanted to highlight because that's a very interesting case. It's right up next to this Sid Meier's Civilization 7, this huge big budget game, right? Very large team. And it's kind of toe in toe with Balatro. Balatro, I don't know if you've played that game. It's this fun little like poker roguelike. It was actually made by one guy in his spare time. The guy was actually working an IT job for a few years, and he was just kind of playing around with this concept in his spare time, more or less prototyping the game as I'm about to show you. And it turned out to be a hit. So what I would say to you is the reason that the Balatro guy is making so much money, hand over fist, competing with these huge teams, is because he thinks a great deal about design, actually. He cares a great deal about it. He spends a lot of time prototyping different designs and thinking about gameplay. So that's really what we want to do. I think that is a big part of what makes better software better. It isn't just about how many cubes can we put on a screen. So I got this ad from back in the, when I grew up. So I was born in 1983. And so when I grew up, it was all about the console wars. So it was all about, Sega Genesis versus Nintendo. And here we've got, Genesis does what Nintendo don't. And I love this ad, and I love that whole marketing campaign because it's entirely about, it really shows like the aspirational side of marketing a product, of saying, really when you boil it down, any kind of product marketing, any kind of I'm making a game or I'm making something that I want to sell to people, it comes down to there's something we do and they don't do it. So if you read some of this copy, this will take you back. I love this copy. It's imagine you're Spider-Man scaling the face of a towering high rise, or Joe Montana rolling left to throw the winning touchdown pass, or Michael Jackson taking on the evil forces of Mr. Big. Okay. And so, it's putting you in the shoes of these people. Notice when you read this copy, it's not saying, hey, the Sega Genesis has blast processing and we can do so much more. We can push so many more pixels to the screen faster. That is a part of what they're trying to sell you on, right? But it isn't worth anything if it doesn't come down to gameplay that Genesis can do that Nintendo don't. So this is what we're really thinking about. Anytime we're making a product or marketing a product, working on any kind of a game, we have to always be asking ourselves, what do we do that they don't do? If I'm making a poker game, right? Everybody's played poker. That exists. Like, we have poker. So what can I do to poker to make it unlike anything else? What can my version of poker do that other poker games don't do, right? So in this talk, I just want to show you how to get started making actual games, the prototyping process. I want to get you away from tech demos, just working on an engine for engine's sake, aka noodling around in tech, and get you to start kind of turning more towards real product development. I want to show you how to do that. I want to help you. I want to give you some tools to defeat what I would call blank page syndrome, which is just this idea of, I really want to make products, but man, I have no idea where to start. I love to program. Like, maybe I've got a big passion for that. I've got a passion for low-level programming, but I just don't. What do? I don't know where to start. I don't know how to actually make a real product out of this, right? And ultimately, I want to show you or give you some tools to actually continue staying the course and ultimately ship real products, so that at the end of this journey of, say, you want to learn something new, you want to learn how to make games from scratch. Maybe you want to, I don't even care. Maybe you want to learn a game engine. Doesn't really matter. How do you take that passion for wanting to program and turn it into real shippable products at the end? It's hard to stay the course and not get sidetracked into things like, oh, I've got this game I'm working on now. I got to switch engines, and I like this tech stack, so now I'm doing that. So want to avoid that. We want to actually just get some really good habits in and just stay consistent and just actually work on products. So when you start having thoughts about making a game, usually it's, for me, some kind of thought occurs in my head. And so it might be, a lot of my early game ideas were something like a story. And so I might think, oh, that's, kind of an interesting story. I had one of my first game ideas was you go back in time and you kill your grandfather, like the grandfather paradox. And then like that stops you from going back in time. And I thought, oh, that might be a cool game. But like a lot of stories, they don't really, because they're not playable in the way that games are playable, they're not really designed for that. And so just making a game around a story isn't really enough. I would say you can definitely draw inspiration from a story when you're thinking about what's going to go in your game. So a good example of that is actually Dune. The story Dune, beautiful book, love it. It turns out that story actually inspired the entire real-time strategy genre. So you're seeing Command and Conquer there on the right. Command and Conquer is what I would consider that like the fifth or so iteration on the game Dune. So the first Dune game was actually an RTS. And instead of, harvesting the Tiberium like you do in Command and Conquer, you're harvesting spice. So some of these concepts in Command and Conquer, like the harvesters and the resources and all that stuff, it goes all the way back to Dune, interestingly enough, and the spice harvesters. So when you read that book, think about Tiberium. So another one is some people like, oh, I want this to kind of the game to have just kind of like a cozy vibe, or, you know, maybe they're thinking about, you know, lo-fi girl chill hop on YouTube. That's not really enough for a game. That's like an atmosphere. So if when you're starting out, you're just kind of like doodling around, making a lot of art, that's more just a feeling. It's not really, it doesn't have like actual gameplay. So the counterpoint to that would be something like Stardew Valley, where it's really clear what kind of game it's based off of. It's based off of Harvest Moon. It's really clear what you do in the game. But the vibe itself is very chill, kind of like lo-fi girl sort of thing. So vibes are not really a game in and of themselves, but they actually can help you find an audience for your game. They can help you find the type of person you might want to market towards. So I would say that a concrete action of some kind that you have in your head or that occurs to you at some point really is a great starting point for a game. So I've got a few examples here. On the right here, I've got Slipways. And when Jakub Wasilewski was thinking about how to put that game together, the inspiration for it was actually this. All he thought was, I just want to be able to connect planets. And so there's these different planets, and all he was thinking was, wouldn't it be cool to like connect them some way? And the rest of it wasn't really all that clear. It wasn't clear that it would be this kind of cool trading game, kind of like a Forex kind of game. All he was thinking about was having this really satisfying interaction of connecting a planet. So that's that game. Braid, of course, comes from the rewind mechanic from Prince of Persia. So he was just thinking about, what if you could do this one thing? What if you could simulate time and then you could rewind it? That's an action that you can do. Can we build something around that? So if the thing that occurs to you is like some kind of action, some kind of like, what if you could do this? Then that's a pretty good place to start thinking about an actual game. Another way to do it is with game genres. I think game genres are great because they can give you kind of a template for how the gameplay is going to work. So genres already sort of have a kind of set of actions built into them. And that helps you to just think about what's going to be in the game. So on the right here, we've got Into the Breach, which was actually inspired by the game on the left, which is Advance Wars. So Advance Wars is kind of this like real-time strategy Game Boy Advance game. And Into the Breach is similar in a lot of ways, but they ended up, they used the genre as a starting point. But then if you actually play Into the Breach, you'll appreciate how it really isn't anything like the genre that it started out in. I think they kind of naturally followed some of what they noticed as they were playing their own game, and they ended up coming up with something much more unique and interesting than just another kind of strategy game. So I would say once you have an idea for your game, so once you actually have, okay, I'm thinking about a specific interaction, something that I want to start to build. What do you do to actually get started? I think there's a lot of different advice that's sort of conflicting about this. I've heard, from these really expensive game design schools, apparently you can go there and spend like $200,000 and then like a year on just doing like paper prototyping games, which I think is a really kind of bad waste of your money. So I would say paper prototyping, it might work for some games. I don't think it really works that well for video games. It definitely works well for board games because you can get people playing right away. But for video games, because I submit to you the reason it doesn't really work for video games is because the computer is running the simulation. And because the computer can run the simulation, you can get far more advanced simulations out of the system than you would out of board games and paper. And so because of that, everybody is competing on the advanced simulations. And so if everyone's competing on running advanced simulations, then you better be doing that from the very beginning, which means we rely on the computer to sort of tell us what the state's going to be and to update the state. And that's kind of the interesting thing. So instead of doing paper prototypes, I recommend these like low friction playable games. So game on the left is actually my own game, Moose Solutions, and that's actually a screen grab from how it started. So when it started out, it really was just this very bad pixel art. It still is pixel art, but I think each individual tile is something like 8 pixels by 8 pixels. Like really, like what I'm trying to impress upon you is you do not need to be a good artist to do that. I think anybody with a very low amount of art skill could definitely prototype a game like that. And you can have things, you can have the art communicate things like, hey, you know, the player, he might look like a little sausage, but you can sort of tell, you know, that bull looking thing kind of looks like a moose. You can tell that's a flag. So really the art is only good enough to communicate what the gameplay does. And then the game on the right, you would be surprised to know, is Balatro. So that, remember earlier when I showed you, there's this game that's like that one dude made in his spare time when he was working an IT job that's made like millions and competes with Civilization 7. This is the game. This is how it started. So it started out as just this little low fidelity prototype with the cards and the different actions. And so does it look like he spent a lot of money here? Does it look like no, not at all. It looks like he just kind of like went right into it here and started making a game that you could actually play from the very beginning. So we want to do what the Balatro guy did. All right. So I have this slide here. When you start to actually prototype games, it's really easy to get into this nasty loop where you're kind of overthinking how different things are going to interact with each other and how they're going to work. And it can get you into this like analysis paralysis where you're stuck just staring at a blank page. You can't make any action. You can't make any progress forward because you're just wondering like, oh, if I put this in the game, how's that going to work? How's that going to work? How's that going to work? What I would say is, and this is something that I also heard that Jonathan Blow does. I'm not sure, but I heard that he does this. When you have an idea for something that's going to be in your game, it's really best to just put the very first kind of bad version of that thing in your game right away. And just don't even think about how it's going to work with anything else. Don't even think too much about any of those complexities. Just get different things in the game. So one example of that, right now I'm working on a crafting game that's a little bit of an automation crafting game. I had an idea, you know, it's that genre. If you play Factorio, it has this stone furnace in it. Okay, so a furnace, you put in iron and coal, and a little iron plate comes out the end. So I had one idea of how that would work in my head of like, where do the inputs go? Where does the output go? How does the machine work? I had just a quick idea first when I was thinking about putting that in a game. And immediately I hopped into my editor and I put that first version in the game. And the art was bad, but it worked, okay? And now I'm actually at a point where I'm on like the second or third iteration of that stone furnace concept, and I'm improving upon it slowly. But actually it was good just to get the wheels turning in my head, just to get me thinking about the design space, to just put the thing in the game, just get it in. That is what gets your mind thinking about it, gets the wheels turning. And of course, the very first version that you put in is not going to be good. It's going to be crap, but you will end up coming up with a better one and a better one as long as you're actually working on it and thinking through it. So picture I have here is Paul Atreides from Dune. Spoiler alert, but he can see the future. That's like part of the book. So you're not Paul Atreides. You can't just simulate how all of what's in your game is going to work and how all the systems are going to look. That's preposterous. There's just no way, right? So instead of pretending that you're like this guy, what you do is you build things, you put stuff in the game, and then you let the computer run the simulation, and let the gameplay tell you what is good and bad about the game, and then you react to that. You make more iterations on what you see. And then ultimately at the very end, what you should have is something that's pretty refined to where you've kind of worked out what that whole space of design looks like or feels like, or what's good and what's bad about it, what's interesting about it, etc. So that's the secret. All right, on to some programming things. We want to move fast when we prototype. We want to be putting a lot of things in and taking a lot of things out. We don't want friction. So one thing I hear a lot or see a lot is, people with their big, magnificent entity systems, entity component, this, that, or whatever. Boy, when you're in the early stages of prototyping a game, you really shouldn't be thinking too much about that kind of stuff. You really should just be focusing on building like one gameplay element or loop or piece at a time. And if you can do that, you'll be able to move a lot faster in that early prototyping phase. So I say when you start, entities are just one big struct. You're not really going to be thinking about how all that's going to be structured or how fast it's going to be or much of that. Aside from maybe, you'll see there I've got, U32 behavior flags. So that is a bunch of bit flags, that I crammed into one unsigned 32-bit integer. And that does give you a little bit of a performance advantage. And I would say it's fairly like low overhead to implement that. But for the most part, I just kind of keep adding stuff on and don't really notice a problem because, at this early stage of making a game, you're not really trying to scale it up. You're just trying to like prove out that the interactions are interesting. So entities, one big struct. All right, moving on. Just as I said, bit flags. Here's an example of some of the bit flags in one of my game prototypes that I'm working on. Just a bunch of Boolean behaviors, and then you have the ability to turn it on and off, and you can cram all this like Boolean state into just one, unsigned 32-bit integer. So that gives you that little performance kick without all that overhead. Very nice. Another one that I found for improving just my ability to iterate on a game and quickly test out ideas is to just merge the world editor and the game into one thing. So I'll just play this video. This is from the game that I'm presently prototyping. It's called Cave Factory. So all I've got my like level editor, which is just a mode that the game goes into where you can just drop entities into the world, right? And I'm dropping like my, stone furnace in here, and now I'm going to have I can exit my level editor mode really quickly. So now it's going to smelt something for you. And so I can just kind of go in and out of my level editor, just put stuff in the world and play around with it and like see how the things that I'm working on are working. So I really like these kind of like low friction editors and modes where it's all kind of mixed in with the game. I think that's a really great sort of thing to have. You're going to find yourself speeding up your iteration pretty quickly if you have something like that. So I recommend, all right, I got to stop the video. Okay. All right. So on to like dealing with memory, right? Life is short. Don't think too much about memory, especially early on in the game. So I generally use memory arenas, and I statically allocate pretty much all the memory for the game up front. And when I start, I have no idea how much memory the game's actually going to use once I ship it. And that's fine because remember, we're prototyping. We're not trying to like make anything robust or predict any. So I'll have all these different arenas, so I have like a scratch arena. I've got like, this is like just some long-term storage arena, some like where the lifetime is basically the whole game. So there's some stuff I throw onto that. Just like, partition a big chunk of memory, use some memory arenas, put stuff on that. Don't like get it working. Don't really think too much about how much space it's taking or any of that stuff. That's all like way later. Like once you have an audience for the game and you've got a Steam page and it's got 7,000 wish lists and you have a clear runway to actually making money on your game, then you can think about what the F is going on with your memory and you can think about optimizing and all that stuff. It's not something you really care about much in the prototyping phase. Just use memory arenas. Simple, done. Okay. This is, I would say, the most important piece of advice on programming that I've ever received and it comes from Casey Muratori. And so it's very fitting because this conference is very much about his ideas. So when you're actually working on a game, any kind of software project, this does not just apply to games, but really any kind of software project, you never plan out how the architecture or the abstractions are going to work. Don't do it. Just start building stuff. You know, I actually, that image was generated by ChatGPT, which is pretty good because I even said, make something that looks like Casey Muratori, and it kind of looks like Casey Muratori. So I was pretty impressed. But, you know, he's got on his wall is these are the features I'm actually making, and I'm just putting the features in one at a time. Okay. And then as I put those features in, then I'm going to start noticing some patterns, like maybe this little bit of code gets used over here twice or more than one place. So I pull that up into a function. Or maybe like these three parameters that I notice they keep getting passed into the same function in various different places. Like maybe that's a struct, maybe there's some structure there. So as you're building out individual things, you're starting to discover the natural structure of your program. And then that's what you turn into the abstractions. So he's got a really great article on this. My favorite article, it's called Semantic Compression. Fairly old article, but still classic. Talks about a concept that he calls compression-oriented programming. Definitely recommend that you read up on that. I would say for me, it's like it was a life changer. So totally best advice on programming I ever got. All right. So also, you know, we do not want to use high friction processes and tools. So like Rust and test-driven development are out because all of these things make you commit to something really big up front, and that's bad. So it's making you commit to like what this big heavy architecture of your you know, ooh, scary, of your software is going to be up front before you've actually built, you know, before you've like tested the most important thing, which is, hey, like, does anybody give a crap about my game, right? So like, you know, test-driven development, I always just find this funny because it's like, what are you testing? Like, are you testing that people like your game? Or are you testing some things about the code or some arbitrary spec that you came up with? At a very early stage in a product development, there isn't anything to test aside from, hey, does anybody care? Do they want to play this? So I caveat all of this with saying that there is a time for hardening a product. There is a time for unit tests. There might even be a time for some of this, you know, crazy borrow checking and memory safety stuff that Rust does, but that's like way later in the lifetime of a product. That's like once you've already very clearly demonstrated that people want your thing. And when we're talking about games, and I would argue a great deal of software development as well, we're talking about products which are ultimately creative in nature, which by their own definition of what they are, they're trying to do something that hasn't been done before. They're trying to like have some new hook, or like, you know, they're trying to do what Nintendo don't. And so that means when you're trying to innovate, you're not really sure if what you're making is something that people even want. So the spec is never really going to be clear from the very beginning. So starting off with something that hardens a product based on a really clear spec, I just think is a bad idea. So we don't do that. Okay. We also don't spend our money on these like really fancy hipster artists, like the guy on the left, when we're very early in the process of prototyping any kind of product or game. And that's just because it's very expensive to hire people and to pay them. And so if you have to have the nicest art from the very beginning, then you're basically paying your artists to like iterate on your game, and you're going to end up wasting a lot of money on that. You're going to end up wasting a lot of money on art that you're not going to use, because in the process of prototyping your game, you're going to then discover, oh, that gameplay element didn't work. Oh, that didn't work. That didn't work. Well, if the gameplay didn't work, then the art that works with the gameplay also isn't going to work. And so now you're double hosed on how much money you spent. You didn't just lose your time. Now you also lost your money in hiring this artist. So start off, do what John Blow did with Braid. You know, if your main character looks a little bit like Donald Trump, so be it. Like, just go with that. Nobody cares. Like, the important, interesting thing about Braid is the gameplay. And then later on, he brought on an artist once all the gameplay was prototyped, and it turned out to be amazing. You know, it turned out we had a really great game there. So let's not spend the money right away. And this is good. This is just something you would like, because if you don't spend money right away, then you have a longer runway to make games, you know, before you max out your credit cards and you got to go back to work, right? So don't you want to give yourself like a longer, better chance of success? So let's do this. All right, another thing too, I don't want to bag on people, because you need people. People are very important, but like, people are also kind of time vampires. They kind of like need a lot of time, and they kind of like want a lot of attention. And so when you're very early in the stages of making a product, it's really not such a good idea to have too much collaboration going on. So if you can keep the group really, really small, or even if it's just you, I think that's great, because then you'll find that your schedule is much more clear to just work on the game itself, instead of having to like meet up with your artist and, you know, catch up with them and then, you know, talk about whatever art that they're working on. Or if you're designing a game with somebody, like co-designing it, then like they're going to have ideas and you're going to have to listen to their ideas, and you know, they're going to have to listen to your ideas, and it's going to be a lot of meetings over and over again, just talking about what's going to be in the game. So I would say definitely avoid that. If you are going to be, you know, collaborating and, you know, synergizing with people or whatever, like this lovely iStock photo has, I would say it would be a good idea if everybody has a really clear lane that they're working on. So maybe you've got a fairly big game project, and like one person, or maybe you're a studio and like one person is prototyping a totally different game concept, and you're prototyping your game concept, and you're just kind of comparing notes about which one works. Like, I think that's fine if they're like separate game concepts. Or maybe you're like later in a project and the gameplay is mostly done, but the artist, you're getting the art in. Okay, so that's a great time to collaborate with somebody. But yeah, I think if you're going to have a bias, you want to be a little bit more like Marcus Persson over here, the guy on the right. You may or may not have heard of him. He made this game called Minecraft. It made like $1 billion, right? So like, maybe we want to probably do a little more like what he did. Turns out there are actually some pretty good reasons to work on your game engine if you're that kind of person. So if you've been watching thinking, oh man, I am more of a programmer, I just want to work on my engine, here's the slides for you. If the gameplay itself requires the engine to be different in some kind of a way, then you kind of have no choice, right? So the game that I'm going to show you is Fez. And I love this game. It's a little bit older, but the idea here, I'll skip ahead. Look at this. You're rotating this world and walking alongside it. And that's kind of what the gameplay is. That's sort of the hook. That's what makes it interesting. I just don't think that this is the kind of game that would really lend itself all that well to being prototyped with an existing engine. It's like maybe one of those things where you could do it, but I sort of feel like you'd be fighting the engine the whole way. You know, and I don't want to get into like a big, you know, argument about any of that, but it's just to say, I kind of think having more control over your engine and being able to very specifically work out the details is going to yield a much better result if you're making a game that's trying to do something a little bit more ambitious or boundary pushing like this game. I would say that's definitely the case with the next game I'm going to show. So this is Noida, one of my favorite games. Every pixel in this game is simulated. So you have all these different kinds of fluids and solids, and and gases and alchemy. And it turns out that to do any of this kind of simulation, their team had to make this kind of really rather complicated, multi-threaded sort of a program that actually splits up the world into all these different tile chunk sections or different simulation regions. It's just not the kind of thing where a commercial game engine would do that out of the box. It definitely is the kind of thing where you would need level of control at the level of the engine just to even accomplish the basic gameplay. And the story behind that game, this is actually a story of people who were interested in noodling around with tech. So they were interested in this kind of cellular automata simulation. They had played around with falling sand simulations, that kind of thing. They wanted to make a game out of it. They were doing these sort of tech demos with the falling sand simulations. They kind of gradually pivoted more and more towards it being a game. And they tried out a bunch of different game concepts. They tried out something that was like worms. That wasn't quite as interesting. So they really played around with it. They just, they found a bunch of problems with it. They eventually pivoted towards this kind of like roguelike gameplay that they settled on. So that's what I'm telling you is, and that's, if I was to the most optimistic way of looking at all these cube rendering things is hopefully some of you guys are thinking about what sort of a game you can turn it into. So it's not just, hey, I'm really good at programming. So that's what they did. I would say just consider doing something like that. There are reasons to play around in tech, but aside from that, just prototype the game. All right. Distractions are bad. You shouldn't do them. Social media in particular is bad. You just spend a lot of time on it, arguing with Uncle Bob and not really accomplishing anything. So I just generally think it's okay to just walk away from these platforms completely, and that there's really only one platform that you need to care about, and that is Steam. So if you're thinking about optimizing any algorithm at all, optimize the Steam algorithm. Don't optimize the Twitter algorithm. Don't try and get likes and all that stuff. No Facebook, no Instagram, YouTube, it's all right, but it's not really as good as just getting a lot of traffic to Steam. You can use YouTube to get traffic to Steam, but it turns out it's actually not as good as just getting some streamers to play your game. So you don't have to quit right away. You definitely don't. But I would say, consider this. If you have one last excuse for needing social media for your business or whatever, BS. Just whenever you have an announcement or something, let's say you're going to announce your game, you're going to do the announce tweet. You don't have to do the announce tweet yourself, right? You don't have to subject yourself to the toxic waste. Instead, what you can do, because there's people whose profession it is to expose themselves to the toxic waste by introducing the rest of the world to new games. So you tell one of those people, hey, I'm launching my game. I'm putting my game out there. And they're like, oh, do you have a trailer? And then you give them the trailer, and then now they got the scoop, and then they do it. Okay. And now you never had to go on there, and you never had to see whatever thing we're arguing about today. And so when you're not doing that, then you're actually working on your game a lot more. And so I would say that's beneficial to you. So streamers are on these platformers. You are on the platforms. YouTubers are on all these other people are doing it. You don't have to do it. You're just be a game dev, and then tell them to do the thing, and they will, and you'll get traffic from it. All right. So let's say that you've gone through all of this, and you've actually built out all of the gameplay. You've actually prototyped a real game. You're there. You've got something that people can actually play. Maybe they can play it for 5 hours, maybe 20, etc. There will come a point where you might have to make some decision about, hey, should I actually polish this game? Should I ship it? At what level or what amount should I polish the game? I did this with my first game, Moose Solutions, because I felt like it was an important thing to do. because people seem to like the very first version of the game. I made a small version of it that was about 50 puzzles, and people played all the way through. And so to me, that was kind of a good sign. But then it kind of became this question of how much money or how much time do I spend on polishing it? And my thought around it was, first of all, you probably shouldn't polish and finish and deliver a game to Steam if people that you're giving it to don't play the whole way through, or they don't play that long. That's a pretty good indication to me that like there's something wrong with your game play. That just means people aren't really engaging with it. Or so definitely don't put a lot of effort into polishing something that people aren't really enjoying that much. So at that point, you've probably got to scrap the project or rework it, or, figure out some different direction for it. But if they are enjoying the actual gameplay, and people will play a game with kind of bad graphics as long as the gameplay is good, then you can start thinking about, okay, what's an acceptable amount of polish? How much money do I want to spend? With this game, I finished it mostly because I just wanted to have I didn't think it was going to make a lot of money. I just wanted to have a good project under my belt, something that showed all this experience. And so that's why I finished it. And I didn't really spend that much money on it, but there are some things that you're going to have to spend a lot of money on. So I did spend a decent chunk of change on, I think I spent $2,000 on that capsule art. So you're going to have to spend some good money on capsule art. And that's just that's the minimum ante, is spending money on capsule art. If you don't already hire an artist or maybe do some of the art yourself, you're going to be spending some money on capsule art, because that is your storefront. That's what makes you stand out. You absolutely have to spend the money there. The rest of the budget is kind of up to you. I would say the amount of budget you should spend on the game should depend on how much gameplay, like how many hours of gameplay there are in your game. It just is a fact, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, what makes games marketable, a big part of marketability, is just how many hours do people play the game? Is it a 10-hour game? Is it a 20-hour game? Is it a 100-hour game? Is it a 1,000-hour game? So I would say that a game like Factorio does really, really well, because that's a 1,000-hour game. There are people that have like thousands of hours in Factorio, and that all of a sudden, when you think about that, there's this player base that's willing to play that game that long because of its richness and depth. Now, all of a sudden, it makes a lot of sense to spend all this money on the art and textures and making everything perfect, right? Because you've got this really captive audience that's spending a lot of time in your game. So I would think about it that way. There's some level, some amount of time and money you want to spend, and you got to just anchor it at the right point. Great thing about shipping a game is it actually hardens your game engine. And I use game engine in quotes because all that I really mean by game engine is like your leftovers. So when you finish a game project, you've got all this like leftover code, I've got my leftover Windows platform layer, and my leftover Mac OS platform layer, and my leftover iOS platform layer. And I've got all these other like gameplay systems that I came up with and that I could probably take out and use in other projects. And I've got stuff that loads art, stuff that plays sounds and mixes it and all that stuff. And that's my engine, and I can reuse that. So I actually had one of these, I had Chat GPT generate an image. I think the prompt was like some hipster engine, like a Thanksgiving dinner just beating the snot out of some engine programmer. And so that's what we have here. And actually, I like this because, that turkey that you see there is the phoenix rising from the ashes. That turkey that's the Sega Genesis that does what Nintendo don't, right? That turkey is making actual products, and then he's using those products to lever himself up into a better position and to compete better and to actually win, instead of complaining and just, wishing that everything were more handmade, right? And so I would say, to wrap up, low-level programming is playing with power. But with that power, you have to realize that it's actually just not enough on its own. It's not enough to say, oh, I'm such a good programmer, I can make like all these rotating cubes. Oh, I'm such a good programmer, I can, render these amazing like Minecraft scenes, and I can push the computer so much. Like, that is a great thing. That's powerful. But you have to point it in a direction that makes a marketable product if you want to get some success out of it. So you need to do what the folks that created Noida did. You need to say, oh, we can do these amazing like multi-threaded pixel simulations. Let's do that, and let's see what kind of gameplay we can get out of it, right? So it's not enough to just be like, we can push the computer to its limits. You got to do more than that. And actually, that's kind of like what's funny about the, Sega Genesis does what Nintendo. Like, I would actually argue that in many ways, much of the success of Nintendo comes from the fact that Nintendo did. But what they did wasn't just saying, oh, we competed on blast processing, and like, let's tell you all about all the things that our console can render. It was, no, look at these games. Look at Super Mario Brothers 3. Like, isn't it amazing? He can fly around, and he's got items, and there's these bosses, and like Bowser. And so look at Mega Man. Like, Mega Man's got these abilities. Look at Samus. Like, look at this world that you can. So they were really thinking about gameplay first, and then their ability to control what the computer does was in service to that design. So that's how you have to be thinking about it. So yeah, you are powerful. There are all of you that are attending this conference, you have great intentions. You are some of the most talented people. It's got to be pointed in the right direction. So I'm Ted, and that was my TED Talk. You can get my first game, Moose Solutions, on Steam and the App Store. Just search for it. It's available on Windows, Steam Deck. It's also available on Mac OS and on your iPhone. So give it a try. If you like it, leave a nice review. I'd appreciate that. There are also some moose or meese that are being passed around the conference. Thank you to Casey Muratori for helping me ship those moose to Sweden so that you could all enjoy them, and have a good conference. I wish I was there. Love you guys. Appreciate it. Glad you liked it.
But can Ted hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, you can hear me. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, we have a moose here for Ted. This was Ted the entire time. Okay, he's been sitting right here.
My favorite thing is that like most of that moose's butt was facing the camera for a large portion of the conference. And so I don't know. I like my partner in particular found that hilarious. So there you go.
All right. So first of all, Rust is not a bad language, okay? Let's just get that. Rust is you can work with it. It's got friction, but I mean, there's ways of fixing that.
It's all right.
So it's interesting. You're probably he's freezing. Is it okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little bit muffled, but I think I can make it out.
Okay. You're very marketing focused, which isn't something I see in a lot of indie developers. How did you come to this strategy of developing indie games? Because most people would call indie games art. It's a purely artistic form for them, and less of something to make a living with.
Right. Well, I guess what I would say is like, I think you have to find some mixture of what is in the thing that you're making that is like all about what you want out of it. And then there's also what people want. And so you have to like find that kind of balance between what are some games that I really like that also happen to be very marketable. So if you play a lot of games, which I suggest anybody who's an independent game developer do, especially playing like the top list of indie games and those that were successful, you're going to find a number of very successful games that you really like. So for me, one of those was actually Factorio. I sat down, I played it, and I was like, hey, I wouldn't have ordinarily thought, because I originally heard of that game through Chris Zukowski's blog, which is How to Market a Game. And so that's where I originally heard of it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. He mentions this game. And then I went and I played it, and it turned out that I really liked it. There's a lot of things that I think are great about that design. And so from playing that game, I kind of discovered that there's quite a bit of overlap in my own preferences for like what I like out of a game, and what also generally the Steam marketplace wants. So I don't necessarily think that there has to be this total compromise between, or that you necessarily have to be a starving artist. I think really like what if you care about people seeing your work, then the greatest thing that you can do is be successful. Is to make something that a large number of people would want to play or would be interested in. Otherwise, you're basically just noodling around in your basement and nobody's ever going to see your work. So like if you care, then part of that, I don't think you're necessarily compromising your vision. I think what it is it's making your work more accessible in a way by making it align more with human nature and the things that people tend to like, the kinds of things that people want out of that experience.
Cool. Now let's say the only types of games that you enjoy are pixel art platformers. What do you do?
Me?
No, just in general,
Oh,
like a
yeah.
random.
Oh, let's say that's what you're into.
Yeah. If
Well,
that's
it's
the
funny that
only
you
type
mentioned
of
that
game you
because
play.
like I am currently prototyping a game that is a pixel art platformer, but that I'm mixing it. I'm actually trying to see like, what if this were an automation game? So what if this were like a Factorio? What would that look like? What kind of a design space is that? It's actually turns out that it's very different from this design space that is in Factorio, because Factorio is very like top down 2D. And so they make a lot of decisions that make sense for top down. But when you're side scrolling, all of a sudden it opens up all these different possibilities that you wouldn't necessarily think of. So things like liquids behave differently because there's a verticality to it. So you can have like large storage basins of liquids, right? Maybe you could like freeze liquids and like move them around and then like thaw them. And so in top down Factorio, um, the liquids, it's like the verticality of it is kind of abstracted away. It's kind of like not something that you see, although you presume that they are filling a tank. On a 2D side-scrolling version of that's trying to explore a similar space, then all of a sudden, like the verticality of it's there. You can actually see the basin of water like coming down and emptying. And so I think that you can take what you like out of those older genres, out of like platformers, and then you can take a look at what currently is doing really well, and you can see if there's some overlap between those things. You can carve out your own thing from that.
Now, on the tech side, was Moose Solutions? Maybe I didn't catch it. Is it custom tech? Is it a custom engine?
Yeah, I made it all from scratch actually, and I made the game after. So I wanted to make games, didn't know how to do it. I was not satisfied with a lot of game engines that existed at the time, and so I was not really satisfied with Unity. And I tried a bunch of them, and the more that I learned, I kind of started to realize I disagree with a lot of decisions that are made. And so I started watching Handmade Hero and seeing how Casey Muratori did it. And then I just kind of took the base learnings from that and then turned it towards prototyping games. And so I think I watched like about up to episode 60 or so. And then I was like, oh, okay, this gives me more or less what I need to know to start, because he does like a software renderer in that series, and instead I needed to do like DirectX or Metal on Mac OS. And so then I just kind of started swapping out those different parts, and gradually I had something that I could use to prototype real games in. And then that's kind of Moose Solutions. The very first prototype came out of that work, I would say.
Now, was this more of a decision for, I guess, your own enjoyment, or did it help you make the product better or ship faster, or is this maybe something that cost you in the short term for one game, and then it's something that over time, after you have like 3 games and your engine is hardened, will pay back dividends?
Yeah, so actually I think like looking at it from a business perspective is the main reason that I chose to do it. Well, there's a few reasons. One of them is control. I think that video games, when done best, are just the kind of thing where you need to have maximum control over the result. And when you can't actually see the source code, when it's not something that you're managing, right? When it's somebody else's thing, then you don't have that level of control. So you can't get exactly what you want. I think that's a big problem with game engines. Also, I want complete and total ownership of all of the intellectual property of anything that I make. I don't ever want to be beholden to a third party entity pulling the rug out on me and saying like, oh, and like this actually happened with Unity, right? So we have an example of that. We have an example of them kind of trying to do that. And I just never want to be in a position where my project that I've been working on for like 5 years gets the rug pulled under it, and now I have to face all of this stress. And then so that kind of brings it back to that point about how do you feel every day, right? I don't want to feel stress. I don't want to feel like somebody's business decision in a faraway land is affecting my core of my livelihood. And so, and I don't want other people's like bad software decisions to affect how I prototype my game. I never want to have to like go and update stuff. I just want to be able to sit down and it's all pretty much the same, doesn't really change. And I'm in total ownership and control over it. So I think it's really like a risk mitigation strategy for the most part. I'm saying to myself, if my intent is to be in games for a very long time, then it starts to make sense to make a lot of these decisions that are more like a 10, 20-year, 30-year thing where I'm basically investing. So I'm investing into a business, which takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money, and then over a long period of time, you eventually get a return out of that. And I guess that's how I look at it is I'm not really in it for the short term, so why would I make short-term decisions?
That's good. Switching a little bit, what was like the hardest distraction for you to cut?
Oh gosh. I think just like a lot of like social kinds of things. I think it's a really common kind of pattern I see with like a lot of people is like maybe they want to be making games, but then they get like kind of sidetracked into this like content creator thing. And now they're kind of like doing the content creator thing instead of just making the games because you get more of an immediate reward. Like making games it's really hard. It takes forever. And like you only really get the dopamine hit on the few days when you like actually like put something out there. And so it's very understandable why people would get sucked into this kind of like content creator thing because you can do a video or you can do an article or you can do a this or that and then you get like finally get a little bit of dopamine because like you want that because like you've been wanting to put something out there and like and get a little bit of a reward signal. So I understand like why people get sucked into it, but ultimately I don't really think that it helps your game do all that well. I don't think that it's the greatest use of your time. So
Is there any distractions that are left that are hard to cut? I don't know. Like any gaming habits? Like, how do you like? Is 100% of your time right now focused on game development?
So no, but like the biggest distraction I would say, uh, I do kind of manage that. First of all, I think like if you're making games, you should be playing a lot of games. So you should actually be setting aside a lot of time. But then the way that you play games as like a game creator is going to be very different from the way that you might play games as say someone who's just enjoying games, right? So as somebody that's creating games, what I'm trying to do is like I'm trying to expose myself to a lot of the like latest things that have been successful, basically market research. And I might not necessarily like play them that long. I kind of want to play them like long enough to understand what the hook was or like why people really liked it or what's the thing that they got the most out of. So I'm always setting aside some time to do that and to like just look at all these things, all these games, just try them out. I think that's a good thing, but that really should not be like your bread and butter. It shouldn't be the thing that you do most of the time. So I would say here's what I've noticed. Okay, so I've noticed that hardcore prototyping games and like being in that like game design space is the most mentally draining, the most difficult part, and you can't be in that 100% of the time. So I kind of set like it's kind of like weight training in a lot of ways. Like weight training, you lift weights. You're not supposed to lift weights every day. You're supposed to take days where you like rest, right? Where you recover. And so I take days where I rest from hardcore design. I take days where I, instead of just like solving some butt puckering design problem, I'm just kind of like, I'm going to go make some art or I'm going to like, work on some sound effects or something. Like I do something else that's not that I think is like a little bit more restful. And then I find that that's like a good balance where I'm not kind of constantly wrestling with those problems. And what you end up finding is that in the back of your head, you're still wrestling with those design problems. And if you give yourself that chance to rest, then when you do sit back down for those hardcore days, it's a lot better. Like you've kind of worked through a lot of the problem by then.
Cool. And so you're full-time indie right now, right? Correct? Is that correct?
I am like I am a person who saved up a bunch of money and invested it and who relies on a spouse to cover housing expenses. But I also like have a large runway that I saved and invested. So I'm what you might call like a financial independence, retire early sort of person. I spent a bunch of time in the software industry. I spent like maybe 10 years or so, and I just like saved up a big ball of investments so that I could attempt to do this is sort of what I did. So for now, yes, I am full-time prototyping games, living off of an investment income, living off of a little bit of game income, like a mix of different things.
Okay. So you have this, you're working, you have a ball of money, right? You have, let's say, I don't know. Well, I'll ask you, what do you think is like a decent amount of runway for someone making the jump into indie dev, right? Like you're working at a job, you want to make games. How much runway do you need before you
That's tough.
do it?
It's a tough question because first of all, I think before you can even really answer that question, you need to understand what your spending is. So if you have no idea how much money you're spending in any given year, then I can't really answer your question about how much you need.
Let's do it in
So
years. Like how many years? Like let's say
how many
like
years?
yeah, like do you need 2 years of runway? Whatever your spending is, or whatever the amount of money you have divided by your spending.
I mean, ideally, you'd like to be like pretty darn close to just being able to like, go for as long as you could. But I think two years is fine. It's there's a cost though, because um, if you get to your end of your runway, then you're going to have to pay a big cost to like re-enter the workforce, right? And so ideally, you'd like to minimize the chance of paying that cost. You definitely don't want to be churning like back and forth all the time, which is why you probably want like at least I think your intuition about wanting a longer runway is right. So you don't want to be that person that's like, oh, I left my job and now I've got like 2 months and I better like, really do it, because then what's probably going to happen is you're going to not spend those 2 months on your game. You're going to spend those 2 months fretting about how you're going to get the next job. So like there should be some reasonably, but I would say like more importantly is that before you leave the job, you should be prototyping your games. You should be building the skills so that you're actually ready. You should have a game prototype that is pretty much all of the way. So if you look at the guy that made Balatro, that's essentially what he did before he left his job to finish that game. He already had the prototype more. I think he might have even had a publisher signed by then. He had a lot of things set up and like out of the way before he decided to quit the job. It still was not a sure thing, but it was pretty far along. And kind of what I'm trying to impress is that a lot of the prototyping stuff that I talked about is something that you can do while you're working a job. So Moose Solutions, that game, I prototyped most of the gameplay while I was working a job in my spare time. And that's because you're spending your time focusing on the gameplay, the core thing that's important, right? And you're not distracting yourself with all the other stuff. And then you've got this working prototype, you've got something that's actually playable, and then you can polish that. You can spend your time after you've left your job polishing that thing. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
If there's like, the right answer is $500,000.
I think I'm gonna open it up to the audience. No, we're out of time. Oh, we're out of time? Holy shit. All right, I guess we're out of time. Thank you. That's Ted. Please clap.
Thanks, guys.